Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Adam Golov, Marketing Communications Manager at Data Conversion Laboratory, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I want to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will make them available on our website. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs today and in the future. Without further ado, welcome Elliot.
Thank you, Adam. So my name is Elliot Kimber. Today I'm going to be talking about the question of why is DITA so hard, and try to understand what that means and how we can try to understand it and address it as we implement DITA or take DITA forward in our own environments. All right, so a little bit about me. I've been doing this for a very long time. Which I want to say how long I've been doing it, almost as long as DCL has been doing our thing, actually. I am one of the founding members of the DITA Technical Committee, and still actively involved in the development of DITA as a standard. So today I want to talk about what is DITA, not really in the sense of like, you know, the nuts and bolts of DITA, but sort of from a more philosophical standpoint. I want to talk a little bit about what people complain about and the exploration of their complaints. In my experience over the last really, well gosh, 15 years of developing DITA as a standard and implementing it for a number of clients and for my own use, the challenge and the frustration is that, you know, a lot of people complain about it and you know, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for bad reasons. But it's important for us, and certainly for me as somebody who is a developer of the DITA standard and a champion of DITA as a technology and an implementer of DITA in clients, it's important to understand why do people complain, why are they complaining, what are they complaining about, and what can we do to address those complaints. That really brings up the question of why is DITA so challenging, right? I mean, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that DITA, you know, presents some challenges. So what are those challenges and why are they there? I'm also going to philosophize a little bit about DITA as a form of Aikido, and I'll say more about that in a bit. And then I want to just talk about hyperdocument management requirements and strategies, because ultimately this comes down to the fact that the documents that we're creating in DITA are really very sophisticated hyperdocuments, certainly for most of us. All right, so what is DITA? Right, if you Google DITA, one of the three things in the first three images will come up in your Google search as the top. Probably not DITA standard, probably the performer or the sunglasses. But DITA will almost certainly be the third thing. Now the fourth person here, the fourth image, this is Saotome Sensei. He is an Aikido practitioner, a master of the martial art Aikido, and he's the head of the school that I happen to train in Aikido. And I included him here because I'm going to try to make the point that there are many important similarities between DITA as a technology and a practice and Aikido as an approach to both martial arts and to engaging with the world generally. But first I wanted to have a little poll of the audience, and I'm not sure it's worth actually taking the time out of the webinar to get your responses. But when I'm giving this in front of a live audience, what I'm asking is how many of you are managers, how many of you are technical writers, how many of you are implementers. So just so I have an idea of what my audience is. In the past, that audience, you know, depending on where I'm giving this talk, has been roughly split evenly among those different categories. And of course, some people who are new to DITA as well. I'm just going to assume that that's the makeup of our audience today. But first, I want to have a little digression about Aikido. That's me on the right in my practice attire. So Aikido. Aikido is a defensive martial art that's based on blending with an attacker's energy, capturing their balance, and then redirecting it. And the idea in Aikido is we're helping our attacker return to harmony. The goal of Aikido is ultimately universal peace and harmony. It's really a very groovy love approach to martial arts. And some people may find it somewhat, what's the word I'm looking for? Paradoxical. How can a martial art be concerned with peace and love? But it is. Another interesting aspect of Aikido is that there's no one true way to do it. The man on the right is Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido. And he had many very interesting ideas, but one of the things that he insisted is that Aikido is not something that you learn and then you do it exactly the way you were taught. Rather, you are expected as a practitioner of Aikido, as you gain in your skill and your mastery, to express it in your own way, to take it and make it yours. In that sense, a true art. And DITA is very much the same way, right? There's no one right way to do DITA, and DITA by its nature as a technology is designed to allow you to take it in many different directions. So yeah, so if you're an Aikidoist, you're expected to develop your own expression. The last thing about Aikido, and this is really where I think Aikido and DITA come together, Aikido is all about connection. As a physical practice, when you're training with another person, you can only perform your techniques if you have a connection with that person, both a physical connection and a mental connection, and so forth. And DITA as well is also all about connections. And hopefully I'll explore that a little bit more as we go forward. So DITA. So that's Michael Priestley, one of the original architects of DITA. So DITA is a standard XML application architecture for human-consumed documents, whatever that means. DITA is optimized for interchange and interoperation of content processing and DITA-specific knowledge. And this is one of the ways in which DITA is very different from its companion standards. In particular, DocBook was not specifically designed for interchange and interoperation. It was designed, to represent documents in a very complete way, but where interchange and interoperation across enterprises or across communities of use was not a requirement. By contrast, DITA was designed, and Michael was, fierce in his championing of these aspects of DITA, was designed specifically for interchange and interoperation in all these different ways. So, distinguishing architectural features of DITA, right? We have specialization, so that enables controlled extension from a base vocabulary. Use by reference, so we can reuse content components in multiple contexts, right? Within different maps, we can use DITA maps to reuse things. We can use content reference to reuse things, right? We have a mechanism of indirect addressing, which is keys and key references, introduced in DITA 1.2 and then expanded in DITA 1.3 with key scopes. And another interesting aspect of DITA is that it was designed from the beginning to work entirely from the file system, meaning that you didn't need to have any kind of content management system or special processing that implemented some magical aspect of DITA that was not fully specified in the standard. S1000D is an example of a standard like that, where the standard says, in order for you to use S1000D, you must use a content management system that makes this particular part of the required processing happen, because we're not specifying that. And DITA said, yeah, no, that's not going to work for us. But ultimately, DITA is all about connection, right? It's about connection between organizations and people who are sharing and interoperating with their content and their processing. It's about connection of content elements to content elements, right? It's about connection of people who need information to the information they need at the time they need it, right? So there's a whole connection aspect of DITA that's very interesting. All right, so that's my quick philosophizing about DITA, trying to make the point that DITA is ultimately about connection. So now the topic of the day, DITA is too hard. And if we were in an audience, I would have you raise your hand. How many people here think DITA is too hard? And of course, everybody would raise their hand except the one person who's, Michael, pretty much would say, no, DITA is fine. All right, so what are some of the common complaints about DITA? I mean, even I would raise my hand if you said DITA is too hard, right? Because it is too hard, right? So DITA is too hard to author. People say, oh, I can't figure out how to actually create my content. It's too hard to process. The data processing required is just too complicated. I can't implement it. I can't make that work, right? It's too hard to manage. Right? How do I keep track of all the stuff that's going on, right? And then we're pulling our hair out. And, you can see this poor man has already lost most of his hair. So the question then, all right, all of those things are true. Everything I just said is true. But really, the question that I want to ask is it DITA's fault? And I would assert that it is not DITA's fault. Right? At this point, some of you in the audience may be going, wait a second, how can it not be DITA's fault? You just said DITA has all these problems, right? All right, well, whose fault is it? Right? It's the fault of technical documentation itself. Yeah. So technical documentation, by its nature, is inherently complicated. Right? It's a very sophisticated stuff that we're working with here. So what I came to realize is what we really have is a mismatch of expectations. Right? So DITA as a technology exposes and makes explicit the inherent complexity of sophisticated technical documentation. Right? Technical documentation is sophisticated. It's got complex structures like procedures and reference information, complex tables, ways of navigating, lots of the need for detailed markup in the content so that you can support search, so that you can support automated linking, so that you can support, whatever the presentation requirements are that you have, whatever it is, all that stuff is inherent in your technical documentation, right? What happens with DITA is that DITA exposes that and makes explicit things that were either not fully exposed or were hidden, or things that you simply couldn't do, right? So desktop publishing and non-DITA XML systems do not fully support this sophistication, right? That is, there are things that you need to be able to do or that you would like to be able to do with your content that systems that are not DITA, whether they're desktop publishing, proprietary systems, or simply non-DITA XML systems, simply cannot do because they were not designed to do it for whatever reason, right? The evidence for that is the fact that if this statement was not true, we wouldn't have needed DITA, right? We needed DITA to support and address requirements that were not being satisfied. Now, having said that, let me make clear too, for any given, organization, you can always take whatever tools you're using and hack them, customize them, enhance them to do the things that you can also do with DITA, or most of the things you can only do with DITA, and make it work in some way, right? I mean, people have done that with DocBook for many years. People have done that with desktop publishing systems for years. The difference is that there you're doing that all on your own, right? It's not in terms of any standard, and that work is not going to be maintainable, transferable, interchangeable over the long term, right? So the basic point of DITA is that we want to be able to do these sophisticated things. We want to be able to do them in a way that survives over time, where I can interchange not just the content, but the processing and the knowledge as well, right? So before somebody stands up and says, I've been doing all this with DocBook, that's, sure you have, but not with anybody else's DocBook, right? Okay. Not to pick on DocBook, but I will in fact pick on DocBook. But all right, so one of the implications here is that authors are not asked to do the most challenging things, right? If I'm working in unstructured FrameMaker, for example, right, there's a lot of sophisticated things I'd like to be able to do with my documents that I can't do in unstructured FrameMaker, and so I'm just not doing that, right? And so that leads to this mismatch of expectations, right? So DITA is exposing this complexity that's always been there, but hasn't necessarily been obvious, right? And DITA is also a fundamentally different way of structuring and managing technical documents, right? Because we're not just going from, say, unstructured to structured, from whatever I was doing in the past to XML, or from some older XML to newer XML. I'm going from thinking about my documents as, my documentation as books, to thinking about my documentation as pools of topics that are pulled together in many ways. That's a really different way of thinking about things, right? I mean, it's an essential way to think about things in order to do the stuff that we need to do for which we have DITA. But it's a really, really different way of thinking about things, and it can be a real struggle for a lot of people. Yeah? And we have to be sensitive to that. So there's no question that what DITA does is complex, but DITA is complex because technical documents are complex, right? So as a member of the DITA technical committee, you know, it's easy to get defensive, and because people are saying, oh, DITA's too complicated, it's too hard, you know, and we're like, wait a second, you know, it's not our fault, right? It's not like the technical committee was sitting around saying, hey, how can we make this more complicated because this would be cool. It's, no, DITA reflects real requirements that real people have. Not everybody has all the requirements that DITA covers across its breadth, but all users of DITA have some of those requirements, and a few users of DITA, you know, IBM comes to mind, have all of those requirements. Right? So the DITA standard reflects requirements that organizations have, right? Separation of content and formatting. When that's a fundamental tenet of the use of XML, it's really strongly reflected in DITA for the most part, right? There's always a tension there, of course, but that's an important architectural principle for DITA. Separation of publication structure, which is maps, from publication content, which is topics. And this is one of the places where DITA is really distinguished from other technical documentation representation standards, whether it's, you know, something like DocBook or NLM Gap or unstructured desktop publishing systems. Fine-grained use by reference, right? I need to be able to use individual elements, not just entire topics, by reference in some occasions, and DITA enables that. That's, you know, doing that kind of fine-level reuse, I mean, it's hard. It's got some inherent challenges. And then indirect addressing, which is keys. Indirect addressing is essential to meet certain authoring and publishing requirements, certain information management requirements, but it also adds complexity to your information system and to your content, right? Makes things harder for authors. In fact, somebody asked today on the DITA users list, we're using keys in our books and it all works great, but then somebody wants to go and publish a topic by themselves, keys don't resolve. What do we do? Right? That's the, you know, the keys provide a lot of power, do some important things, but at the same time, you know, there's a cost. We have to be aware of that. And then, of course, conditional content, right? That's filtering and flagging. And detailed semantic markup. There's lots of semantic markup out of the box with DITA. You can add whatever else you need using specialization. And then here, this is the one that's really important, and I'm not sure everybody fully appreciates this aspect of DITA. Interchange in the face of different tag vocabularies. That is, you have two different groups. They're both using DITA, but they're using different markup that they specialize in different ways, or simply using different configurations of the base DITA vocabulary. They're still able to interchange their content, interoperate in the processing, share information back and forth with a minimum amount of additional work required. And that's another essential distinguishing difference for DITA. No other XML application, certainly no other standard XML application, can make this claim, right? It's something that you know, people probably, even myself, were claiming way back in the early days of SGML, you know, back in, you know, the 30 years when I was first starting out. We used to claim that XML, you know, you can do interchange, and it was a lie. It was a lie really until DITA came along. Right. So nothing else does what DITA does. And I don't want to, I probably overemphasize that, but really it's worth saying again that DITA is doing something that you simply couldn't do before, not that you didn't need to do it before, but simply the tools and technology wasn't there, certainly not in any kind of coherent standard way for you to do that, right? So that's all to say that writers are naturally not prepared. It should not be a surprise to anybody that a writer who, you know, came up doing, you know, usual unstructured stuff, creating books, the kind of things that, you know, technical writers have been doing since the beginning of time, gets a shock when they're thrown into a DITA system, right? because those writers have expectations set by those systems, both in terms of what those systems can do, what the systems don't do, and, you know, a whole lot of expectations that were never set in terms of what they as writers are now going to be asked to do, because the, you know, the system couldn't do it. They were never asked to do it. Yep. So a lot of the sophistication that DITA enables is going to be new ideas and new tasks to most writers. Yeah? And so there should be no surprise that there is shock. I mean, it surprises me that people are surprised that they take writers who, you know, last week they were an unstructured frame maker, and now they're going to be in this new DITA system, and those writers are like, what the heck, right? And people are like, but this is DITA, it's new and it's cool, and yeah, all right, fine, that's what you're doing. You have to be sensitive to where your writers are coming from. Yeah. So we can't fault the writers for putting the blame on the technology and not on the inherent requirements of sophisticated technical documentation, right? So as somebody who represents DITA to the world, who's, you know, I've invested, you know, a good part of my life now in DITA as a technology and defining it, supporting it, implementing it. You know, it's hard not to take it personally when a writer says, oh man, this DITA stuff sucks, it's too hard. And I'm like, wait a second, you know, take a step back. It's not really DITA's fault. And I don't, you know, I understand why you're putting the blame on DITA, because that's what, you know, you were told. You were told you're doing DITA, you're finding it really challenging, and, you know, your natural human reaction is, you know, a little bit of pushback. All right, I understand that. So how do we deal with that? Just to come back to the Aikido a little bit, in Aikido, one of the things that we learn as a practitioner is to not react in the face of some sort of aggressive response from somebody else. Somebody jumps at us with, you know, a samurai sword or a fist or a knife. Our first reaction should not be to jump back or to get defensive or hit back. Our first reaction should be engage, blend, redirect, help return to harmony, right? So trying to do the same thing here in the context of DITA. I see that you're angry about this DITA stuff. Help me understand why you're angry. Not, you're stupid to think that DITA is hard, right? Which is sometimes what people either say or what people hear other people saying. We don't want to do that. We want to be positive and supportive. All right, so now we get into the part of DITA that's really my place where I get very excited, which is link management and configuration management. And I get excited about this part because, A, it's what I've been focusing on for most of my career as a technologist, but it's also the place where stuff gets really hard. And it's the aspect of technical documentation that DITA exposes that it presents the most challenge after simply coming to terms with topic-based authoring in general. All right, so link management, configuration management. There's some complexity here. It's inherent in our stuff. I mean, I have clients that have, you know, hundreds of documents, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pages, very heavily linked. I know there's lots of DITA users out there that have that kind of thing as well. A lot of DITA users who just have, you know, a collection of publications with a few links. There's that end as well, but it can get very complicated. If I was giving this in front of an audience, I'd ask you to raise your hands how many people have, you know, complex link management challenges, and almost everybody would raise their hand. So, not topic separation, right? This is fundamental to DITA's reuse architecture. Of course, it adds complexity to authoring, right? Because what it has the effect of is turning all publications into sophisticated hyperdocuments. Yeah. So where before you just had a book that was a sequence of chapters and some appendixes and, you know, a little bit of front matter, now you've got a hyperdocument, right? Still the same book, but now everything's done with links, and, you know, it could get really interesting. Yeah? And sophisticated hyperdocuments are challenging. I mean, it's just, it is inherent in their nature, right? So here's a quick example. So I've got a map, references a couple of topics. Topic 1 has a link, wants to have a link to topic 2. That figure in topic 2, how does that work? Pointing to something in map 1, happens to be a key definition, that's then getting it to topic 2, and then it's also getting to the URL. I haven't shown that bit of detail, right? For the same two topics, yeah, I can use those same two topics in different maps. So before, topic 1 and topic 2 were used by the same map. Now, topic 1 and topic 2 are being used by two different maps. Same topics, same links. I haven't modified the topics in any way. The only difference is the map. All right, so map 2 uses topic 1, map 3 uses topic 2, and now to make that link work, I've got to do something a little more complicated. Map 2 has to point to map 3 in a way that allows you to then get from that reference from topic 1 into map 2 to map 3 back to topic 2, right? So that's a very, very simple example of both the potential complexity when you've got reuse and you've got links and so forth, and also the fact that you have to have some kind of indirection in order for that to work, right? Which I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that because it's not the point of this talk, but just to set the stage for that. So I did this Google search, and I got these 3 images. And I was both pleased and frightened that I was the second hit in this search. But anyway, these are some realistic hyperdocuments. I'm not sure what it means that I came up in that search. Good or bad, I don't know. All right. So indirect addressing is required by reuse. Yeah? So I have to be able to have the same reference result to different topics in different use contexts. So direct addresses will not work. I'm just going to repeat that. Direct addresses will not work. Not everyone believes me when I say this. They're like, oh, really? Is that true? Yes, they will not work. So in order to address this aspect of addressing, we added the key and keyref feature in DITA 1.2. Yeah? I just noticed my little icon there in the upper right-hand corner. This is a person being attacked by 2 other people, which is my symbol for hyperdocument management, because it gets crazy. So what do I mean by different use context, right? So the same component could be used multiple times in the same hyperdocument, right? You might have the same sub-procedure that is used by multiple top-level procedures in the context of different parts or different top-level tasks, or whatever it might be, right? Pretty common requirement. I might have the same component used in different hyperdocuments, right? I might have 2 different publications, both use the same topic. That's also pretty common. And I might have the same component used in different versions of time of a given hyperdocument, right? So I've got the last published version, current published version, that both use the same topic. Again, those are 2 different use contexts, right? Because those 2 different versions of the same publication really are completely different documents, and really ends up being the same case as case number 2 here. So let's talk a little bit about direct versus indirect addressing. So direct addressing, it's quick and it's effective, it's fragile, right? You can type out a URL, it'll get you where that URL points as long as the thing it's pointing to is there. But by their nature, direct addresses are fragile. As soon as anything about the thing you're pointing to changes, its location, the IDs inside of it, its location, the file name of the thing you're pointing to, your link is broken, right? Or if you move your document that had the link in it and the link was relative, link's broken again. That's not good. Now, direct addressing is relatively easy to learn and execute, right? And basically, you have a predetermined response to a given attack, right? So I'm going to go here. I'm always going to go here. That's all I'm going to do. And death results. So I'm making fun of karate. So I hope there's no hardcore karateist in the audience. I don't really mean this too personally, but one of the things that Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, said was that there's no sparring, there's no competition in the practice of Aikido. And the reason he said was because ultimately competition is a fight to the death, right? That's the only logical end of that kind of fight. Now, obviously, we don't normally, kill each other in the dojo, certainly not on purpose. But the point is a good one. If your intent is to win, the only way to ensure that you win is to kill your opponent. that's really counter to the whole, the whole groovy love, universal peace and harmony aspect of Aikido. Likewise with DITA, we don't want anybody to get hurt, right? So indirect addressing. You're going to blend and you're going to redirect to the appropriate target. Now, it's harder to learn and execute, but it's more effective. Like the practice of Aikido ends up being, certainly as somebody, when you're first learning it, a lot more challenging than just learning something like karate or taekwondo, because it's a lot more subtle, there's a lot more going on. But once you learn how to do it, it can be very, very effective. One of the things is that you have many options at the time of action. Somebody jumps out at you, you've trained to do many different things. I don't know, karate, people can do many different things as well, but I'm picking on karate at the moment. But the key here is that if we've trained well and we've performed our technique correctly, that does not result. Right? We help our opponent return to harmony in a way that minimizes the damage to them. So for our indirect address, we want to get to the right place, right? Or hopefully the right place, whatever that might be. Hopefully I haven't overworked this analogy too badly. So a little bit of fun with hyperdocument management. So if you're an author, your question is, what can I link to and how do I address it? Right? As an authoring tool, you want to answer the question, what does this indirect address point to? Right? That's a real big authoring challenge. As a producer of a deliverable, you want to know what is the set of resources that are required in order to produce the deliverable that has been requested from the input publication source. Right? What are all the things I have to gather? Topics, images, whatever it is. As a manager, right, as a human manager, what is the version-specific configuration of the publication? Or no, I'm sorry, not as a human manager, as a content manager. What is the version-specific configuration of the publication in a specific repository access context? What the heck do I mean by that? Well, see here in a moment. All right. The essential issue. Given a collection of source components with links among them and managed through asynchronous revision processes, what is the time-specific configuration of those components at any moment in time as viewed by a given agent for specific? Exactly. So in DITA terms, when I process a map in a specific access context, what do I see and what can I see? This is really the fundamental information management, content management, link management issue. So hyperdocument management requirements. And why am I focusing on hyperdocument management requirements? Well, because first, DITA documents are hyperdocuments. Second, most of the complexity in DITA comes from the hyperdocument nature, and the primary service that content management systems can provide is good hyperdocument management features, right? So if you're trying to do sophisticated things with DITA, and that includes sophisticated linking, which it usually does, whether that's just linking within that you're doing for maps, linking for content reuse, or linking for cross-references, or some combination of all of those, you have challenging link and address management requirements. You're going to need a content management system that supports those if you're going to be effective, right? So in my experience, most content management systems do not provide all of the features they should as effectively as they could. So this is in part to say, here's what your content management system should do for you. Whether it does or not is another question. So, but it's also important for authors and managers of those authors to understand these complexities as well, and understand what the kind of features are that they're, if you're a manager, what are the features that your writers need to have in order to support them in their task of creating this sophisticated content, right? As authors, you need to know what do I need from my tools so that I can do my job most effectively. Right. So we have to understand the hyperdocument nature of content. Like, what links to what? I have to be able to get an answer to the where is question, and I have to be able to manage my addresses. Like, what keys are defined, right? What IDs are available for me to link to? if I'm going to go down below the topic level, for example. These are challenging things if you don't have some tooling available for you. Right? Version-aware link management. This is really where I see content management systems have not always done what they could. Right? So the documents that we create, almost without exception, exist in some as versions in time, and we maintain multiple versions in time, and we may need to go back and update or publish different versions in time of the same publication. Obviously at the time we initially published them, but we may need to go back and do it again, either because we've updated it or because somebody needs to have that specific version republished. And there's many reasons why that is. And that aspect of document management and that aspect of version management and link management is often underappreciated. So you need the ability to resolve links to specific versions of resources, right? I need to be able to say this link from this topic needs to always resolve to this specific version of this other topic, regardless of how many newer versions there are, in the context of this particular version of this particular publication. That's basically the requirement, right? I assert that this is configuration management concern. And here by configuration management, I mean it in exactly the same way that it's meant in software engineering. That is configuring the versions of different code components at a specific point in time to produce a specific, functional result. It's an issue in code. It's also an issue in documentation. And this is the other important thing. It requires branching. Right? People are afraid of branches, sometimes for good reason, sometimes not, but this absolutely requires branching. So if your content management system doesn't do branching, that's a problem. And then link and address information services, well, your content management system needs to provide link and address information services that can be used from authoring and processing tools, right? Your content management system is managing your content. It presumably knows everything there is to know about your content. It needs to make that knowledge available to other tools that need access to it, like authoring tools, processing tools, in a way that's not any harder than it has to be to use. Okay. Linking is hard. Right? Complex hyperdocuments are inherently challenging. That's kind of my point here. Non-trivial DITA publications are complex hyperdocuments. So it is important to understand what the potential is so you can plan and prepare appropriately, right? And, all right, now, hopefully I've scared the bejeebus out of you, and you're just like, what the hell did we even think trying to do this DITA stuff right now? No, hopefully I didn't do that, but, maybe I've made you think a little bit about, hey, there's some stuff here that could be challenging. Well, I would now urge you, if I've wound you up into some state of anxiety, to relax, right? Relaxation is a key to finding and maintaining harmony. This is true in life generally. It's absolutely true in Aikido as a practice. I think it's true here in DITA. You have to relax. If you can't relax, you can't respond appropriately. So, all right, fine. I've scared you about hyperdocuments. You've now taken my point that it's complicated, and you're like, can't we just go back to unstructured frame maker and say, well, sure you can, yeah, if you want, but DITA is the cool thing. It's what all the cool kids are doing. This is what we want to do. So, how do we address these challenges? Well, I would suggest that we can apply DITA Aikido. Right? So the first thing to do is connect. Right? Make a connection with your authors, with your managers. Make sure that you're talking to each other. Engage. Right? Redirect, and then return them to harmony. Oh, oops, sorry, I didn't mean that kind of harmony. I meant that kind of harmony. So everybody's now working together as a happy team. Everything's great, right? So, of course, this is easy for me to say. What am I really talking about here? So, if you're a writer, you likely feel like you're being attacked from all directions. Right? There's all this new stuff: topic-based authoring, maps, keys, content references. What the heck? So, first thing is to relax. Yeah. Try to maintain your center. In Aikido, that means you stand up straight. Breathe. Take a breath. Don't get too two wound up. And Aikido breathing as a mini martial arts is essential to doing things correct well. It's true in life as well. Never hurts to stop and take a breath. Then you pick your enemy and engage. And in the picture there, you can see the person in the middle is being attacked by several people. And what he's doing is he's picking somebody. Of his attackers, he's not just standing there and waiting for them to jump on him. He's picking somebody, going to them, addressing them, redirecting them, throwing them, whatever it is, going to the next person. He remains in control of the process, right? And as an author, you can do the same thing, right? You can say, okay, this stuff is all really complicated, but before I do anything, I need to understand topic-based authoring. I'm just going to focus on that, right? That sort of idea. Managers, right? Here I am talking about human managers, right? You have to understand that the authoring and production environment is fundamentally different. I've seen, and I've certainly seen evidence of managers who don't fully appreciate that, you know, DITA is not just a drop-in replacement for whatever you were doing in the past. That it's a fundamentally different technology change, and that there's, you know, that there's a lot of important implications there that need to be thought through and accounted for, right? Right. Another important thing is realize that the added value of DITA may appear to require additional work, especially at first, right? I mean, this is true whenever you introduce a new technology into any business process, but it certainly is true of DITA, right? You know, everybody's happily working along in whatever authoring tool they were working. Now you're bringing in this DITA thing, and I've got to do all this new stuff, right? Especially there's going to be some initial startup costs, you know, like I've got to go through and rethink all my maps and think about, you know, all right, now I've got to have keys, I've got to think about keys and add whatever it is, right? I've got to rework my topics so they're more DITA-ish topics and not just random jumbles of task content or reference information, whatever it is. But once you do that, then you're like, oh, now that's done, now things will be a little bit smoother. Another important aspect is understanding that there may be new roles in the organization. What I call the information architect, and also one I've started calling the document configuration manager. These are roles that usually are not present in typical writing organizations because they simply weren't needed. But DITA, because you're taking your content and really, I mean, you're pulling it apart and you're putting it back together with links, and you have all these new potentials and these new technologies, these new techniques to apply to how you organize and recompose that content, there's a new role that's required, and that's the information architect, a person who understands the map aspect of DITA, who understands things like naming conventions, who can help people, you know, deal with that aspect of DITA, and maybe be the, you know, the main source of knowledge of that part of DITA, the map part of DITA, right? Writers can continue to write topics. They do that well. They should do that. They don't necessarily need to understand all the intricacies of maps as well. So the information architect gives you a way to separate the information organization concern, the naming concern, from the authoring concern. And then the document configuration manager may be the person who deals with the, you know, the versioning aspects of your information as well. You know, not just what maps do I have, but how are they managed across, you know, my, you know, over time as I revise things and we create new publications and whatnot. And then the last one is understand that DITA is not a product. I try to do this a lot where people say, well, we bought DITA and it's not doing what we expected. Well, no, you didn't buy DITA, right? You adopted a new technology called DITA. It comes with a lot of parts. Some of those parts are products, some of those parts are not products, but DITA itself is not a product. And I think that's a mismatch of expectations that has to be, you know, has to be understood and appreciated and worked through as well. You know, people want products. They want to be able to buy something and put it in. That's completely understandable, but that's not what DITA is, right? Or they buy a product that gives them everything they need, you know, authoring, management, production, and they think that product is DITA. So if the product doesn't perform, they blame DITA, right? If DITA doesn't perform, they blame the product. So it's, you need to make sure that your managers understand that distinction as well, and writers, of course, as well. So you've got to prepare your writers, right? You've got to help them move from whatever they were doing before, which is presumably simpler, to the new stuff. You're going to have to provide some training, right? You can't just put people in front of you know, they were using frame, now they're using X metal, go. It doesn't work that way, right? And there's going to have to be discussion and development of new practices and processes. It has to be discussion. It has to be, the team, everybody involved has to be engaged. You have to connect. You have to engage. You have to arrive at your practices, in a coordinated and way that everybody accepts. Got to get the right tooling. Right, your document types have to be configured and constrained, authoring tool configured and adapted, and so forth. I'm speeding up a little here to make sure I have time for questions here at the end. The first bullet I think is really important. You see a lot of teams, for whatever reason, sometimes the reasons are good, sometimes they're not, they'll take the document types, the DITA document types as provided by the OASIS technical committee, the DITA OASIS technical committee, and just use them as is. And that is usually not the best thing to do, right? DITA provides a whole bunch of configuration mechanisms where you can, you can leave out the stuff you don't need, leave in the things you do need, and, with relatively small effort, adapt your, the XML aspects of the system to specifically what you need. And in particular, eliminate choices that your authors never need, right? Because there's nothing more confusing than going to insert an element and getting a list of 300 things. And you're like, well, I really only ever use 4 of these. How do I pick the 4 I want out of the 300, right? That's the basic problem here. DITA provides mechanisms for doing that through configuration. Authoring tools, I think they all now provide some sort of built-in way of doing that kind of configuration as well. You need to do that configuration. Yeah. And then the last bullet, too, is important, right? If you're not getting good-looking, high-quality results at the back end, authors are going to be disappointed and frustrated because at the end of the day, they want to see their stuff look good on print or on the web or wherever it's presented. And the free tools that you get, that underpin the DITA community, don't always necessarily provide good-looking results out of the box. They need some configuration there. So don't blame DITA because your PDFs don't look good, right? Blame, our ancient PDF transform that requires some customization work to make the PDFs look nice. Okay, so summarize here very quickly. Sophisticated technical documentation is inherently challenging. That's really the point I'm trying to make. DITA reveals that complexity, and it's the revealing of that complexity that draws the focus of frustrated writers. So when writers say DITA is too hard, what they're really saying is fully expressing everything that we'd like to do with our sophisticated technical documents is hard, and that's true. It is hard, right? Also, writers don't always understand, and really I should say writers and managers do not always understand the sophistication of what they're being asked to do, right? They're often being asked to make a fairly sizable conceptual leap, a leap in their practice as creators of technical information. Have to be sensitive to that. You've got to set your expectations and provide appropriate support in order to avoid frustration, right? We want everybody to be productive and happy, as much as they possibly can be. So, connection and engagement are key. I apologize for my little Aikido pun there. But I am a father, so I guess I give one dad joke. All right, so there we go. Time for questions.
Thank you, Elliot. A very informative webinar indeed. The first question that has been submitted is, and this is a long one, why must the publishing aspect of the DITA OT be so overly complicated? Not everyone is delivering flat DITA, and not everyone has the budget to hire a consultant to write their style sheets.
Yeah, so why is making the DITA Open Toolkit what you want to do so complicated? And the answer is really an accident of history and the tragedy of the commons, right? The DITA Open Toolkit, it's a free tool developed by volunteers over the last 10 plus years. And in the specific case of the PDF generation transform, it was implemented in a way that was okay for what technology was 10 years ago, but was not the best engineering approach that could have been taken. Let's put that way to be generous, right? And so we're sort of stuck with this code, this tool that works well enough, but replacing it would be hard enough that nobody's so far been willing to do it for free. And anybody who, wants to get paid for doing it doesn't want to give it away. And so that's, I think of that as the tragedy of the commons. There are certainly many commercial tools that you can buy, that will do a nice job out of the box of composing your DITA with less setup cost, effort than the DITA Open Toolkit. But they're not free, and so it's a real challenge. And believe me, I feel the frustration of that aspect of DITA every single day. In fact, what I was doing right before I got on this call was being that highly paid consultant trying to fix some PDF transforms because it's too hard. There are some potential technologies that could help. CSS pagination, I just posted about that last week on DITA Users, offers, I think it could make things much, much easier. The challenge there is we don't currently have a free open source CSS to PDF engine, and that's really the barrier there. So short answer is it's an academic history. The longer answer is because nobody's paid for it, and it's all volunteers. And third answer is, third part of the answer is yes, I fully understand and live that pain every day too. And I'm doing what I can to solve it, but there's only so much one person can do.
Great, thank you, Elliot. The second question that has come in is also a long one, and it is, a lot of our projects have operated where one person serves multiple roles in the process. For example, the writer is also the document producer. Hyperdocument management fails for us when the author does not equal product producer. Thus, instead of reusing content, the delivery producer rewrites unnecessarily out of fear of losing control of the deliverable source content. How do you communicate to each other to promote reuse? Metadata, comments, or some combination of the two? What does DITA, the philosophy, suggest to do with DITA, the tools, so that both remain in harmony?
That's a good question, and that's definitely, so fundamentally what that comes down to is a challenge of human-to-human communication, right? And something in my practice as a developer and implementer of content management systems is, make the point that you can't fix that problem with technology, right? You can only fix that problem by encouraging and incentivizing people to talk to each other, right? And so I'm not sure that I can offer a particularly useful answer to that question other than to say, look at your business processes, look at the way that your organization is set up, and look at the tools and culture that you have around communication and see how you can do that. So for example, agile methods are really fundamentally about changing the way that teams communicate with each other, both in terms of how they communicate with each other in the course of doing their work, day by day or hour by hour, but also in the way that they communicate with each other as a process of communication, right? That, having more frequent checkpoints, thinking about requirements in a different way, changes the way that these teams communicate with each other. So looking at things like that, beyond that, I'm not sure what I can say. Certainly the tools like Slack have, which provide a, I'm not even sure how they do it, but they provide a better user interface for communication among distributed teams that somehow just seems to make people communicate better. Maybe, there's some hope there as well. But other than just recognizing that it is fundamentally a human-to-human communication problem, it's a management problem, not a technology problem, it's a cultural problem, is I think the best I can say at this point, unfortunately.
Thank you for that answer, Elliot. The next question that's come in is using keys really that important? Can I just use direct URI references?
Yeah, so the answer is no, you cannot use direct URI references. Right, keys really are essential. And so I sometimes get pushback when I say this from some of my colleagues on the DCL community. They're like, we've been using direct URI references for years and it's worked fine. Yeah, well, it's either worked fine because you weren't doing reuse, or it's worked fine because it worked by accident. But fundamentally, if you have a direct, in the context of topics in particular, if you have a direct UI reference from that topic to something else, you've now created a hard dependency between that topic and whatever it's referencing, right? So if what it's referencing is another topic, you've now created a situation where if you use the first topic, the topic with a reference, you in a map, in a given map, you must also use it in that other map, right? Well, what if you don't want to use it in the other map? What if in a different map you want that link to go to somewhere else? At that point, a direct URI reference cannot work. You also have the problem that a direct URI reference to a topic can't handle the case where that topic is used twice in the same publication, right? So if my target topic is used twice, I have a direct URI reference to that target. There's nothing in that direct URI reference that tells you which of those two uses you want the link to actually resolve to, right? Because you could go to the first one, you could go to the second one, you could go to both of them. Those are your three choices. There's no way to indicate that in the link itself using a direct URI reference. If I use keys, each of those uses of the topic has a different key, and I can choose at the time I create the link which of those two I want to go to. For things like images, you could get away with using direct URI references to images, but if you use keys, you have a whole lot more flexibility, especially when you get into things like localization, places where you want the thing that your link resolves to change without having to change the link itself, right? So you don't want to, for example, if I've got references to graphics and those graphics get localized, I don't want to have to update the graphic reference just because I localized the image, right? That sort of idea. So, you know, my position is within topics, there should be no direct URI references from that topic to anywhere else. All references should be via keys. That's just my rule. I'm sticking with it.
Thank you, Elliot. The next question that's come in is, can you discuss the role of DITA information architect in more detail?
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to that earlier question where they had a situation where all the roles are you know, multiple roles may be within a single person. The information architect, so with traditional technical documentation, I've got books. Typically a book has one author or maybe, you know, 2 or 3 authors contributing to the same book. But the overall organization of that book and the way it's structured isn't going to change much over time. And, you know, certainly you're probably not going to take all of that content and use it in multiple ways across different publications, right? With DITA, because we're tearing all that apart, now we have a clear separation between the map domain, you know, that is working with maps as ways of pulling information together, and the content domain, which is topics, that is, you know, what I'm actually writing about. There's a whole lot of complexity in maps in terms of, you know, topic refs and keys and organizing things and metadata propagation and how do I organize submaps. There's a lot of complexity there that's very important, but doesn't really directly apply to the task of authoring topics. Therefore, you have an opportunity to both separate those two concerns into 2 different people, 2 different job roles, and therefore save authors from having to also learn all this map stuff when they don't either care to learn it or when they don't need to learn it. I'm not saying they shouldn't learn it. I'm just saying if it's not something they want to learn, they shouldn't be forced to, right? And also it gives you a single place or, you know, a small group of people who can focus on that aspect of DITA, which is, you know, a lot of complexity, and make sure that, you know, the appropriate policies, practices, naming conventions, so forth are there, and also be the place where that knowledge is expected to reside, right? Those people have to go off and learn how maps work and be there as a resource for the rest of the writing team. And I think it's, you know, obviously in a small team, that role might be shared across a few people, but in a larger team, I think it's very useful to have that role be a distinct role that's staffed by, you know, 1, 2, 3 people, depending on the size of your team. And I've seen teams that have this, and it seems to work very well. In some ways, that information architect role is like an editor, but where the editor is responsible for overall understanding and policies around the content, the information manager is responsible for overall policies and content around how things are organized, how navigation is structured, how metadata is managed, and so forth. So two similar but different concerns within the larger concern of information development generally.
Great, thank you, Elliot. And the last question that's come in is, do you have suggestions for how to name and organize keys?
I do. I mean, I'm not sure, we're at the top of the hour. I'm not sure I want to spend too much time on it, but the first thing is to have a naming convention, right? It's very important to have conventions. So if nothing else, pick a convention, stick with it. With DITA 1.2, where there was no key scopes, you had to be a little more, I think you had to be more careful in terms of thinking about your naming convention so that, you know, for example, I like to use sort of a reverse domain name approach where the most general part of the name of the key is first, and then you have more specific parts as you go to the right. And that way, all the keys that are related are going to sort together in alphabetical lists, like, you know, typical, you know, pick a key drop-down kind of list. With key scopes, it becomes less critical because now you can use key scopes to group things, but it's still an important consideration. There's two different kinds of keys. There's resource-only keys, and those are keys that you use for content references or to point to images, or that you point to external resources like websites or whatever. For those keys, it usually makes sense to reflect the thing being pointed to, right? The topic file name, or, you know, some shortening of the website, or, you know, something that describes the image more or less as an object you're going to find in your file system or your content management system. For keys that go on your navigation topic rests, that is the topic rests that define your actual narrative flow of your publication structure, I feel that those names, if it's possible, should be more reflective of the actual you know, rhetorical structure of your publication. So, for example, for a resource-only key that's pointing to a specific topic, you know, the key can be the topic file name, or, you know, the title of the topic made into a string that, you know, can be a key, underscores, or whatever. Right? That makes sense because the only purpose of that key is to point to that particular topic. In a navigation structure, it makes more sense to have keys that are like, you know, chapter 1, or installation, or removal. That is, keys that reflect the rhetorical role that bit of content is playing in that publication. And those keys, right, every publication might have a topic ref with the key introduction. And that way I know as an author, oh, I need to link to the introduction. I'm just going to say key ref equals introduction, and I know whatever publication this is used in, it's going to get to the right place. Right? That's a difference. But of course, there's a lot more potential in your naming schemes than just those distinctions. But I think that gives you a feel for how you might want to think about your naming convention.
Great. Thank you, Elliot, and thank you, everyone, for attending. This concludes today's webinar. You'll be able to access the recorded version of this webinar in the webinar archive section of our website located at www.dclab.com. Also, our next webinar will be Tuesday, March 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, titled The Many-Headed Hydro Branch Filtering, Rendering Reused Data Topics to HTML with Different Filtering, being presented by Elliot Kimber. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.
All right, thank you.